Hello everyone! Welcome back to the Ultimate API Challenge. Today I'm gonna cover the yes/no API. It's fairly simple, very beginner friendly. You just need to know a little bit of JavaScript and a lot of willingness to learn something new and to challenge yourself. We're gonna be working with JavaScript with the ES6 syntax, and the files are going to include basic HTML and basic CSS, which is gonna be provided. What we're gonna be building is a very simple app, kind of like a 8 magic ball where you type in your question, and on a hit on enter or clicking on the button, you're gonna receive an answer if it's a yes or no from our API. Bonus parts is if you wanna create the error states and the loading states, but that's optional. I'm gonna walk you through them in case you do wanna do that, but it's up to you where to stop, and let's get going. First things first, you need to get the files. I'm gonna put the link down below, or you can also visit the website. So once you get to the repository, you're going to see all the files you have. Git ignore prettier RC. This is something that is going to help us quickly indent the code and make it nice. I think you need to have the plugin for VS Code, or you can also indent it yourself. That's also fine. Favicon, is it also? Yeah, it's also shining. It's going to appear in our browser on the top. We have the index, HTML. Everything that is in the main is what we're going to be working with directly in the challenge. As you can see, there are tons of classes that have been already defined. They are all corresponding to what I have included in the CSS files. You are free to change those if you want. So, shall we start? In the very beginning, I always recommend you to go to the link of the API and understand what you can build, what you're going to receive, and to kind of just like get like an idea about what you're going to be working with. Okay, so this is what we're getting once we go to the official documentation. This API is fun. It's not a traditional API. And if you refresh it, you're gonna get a new GIF as well as a yes or a no. Here we can see who it was made by as well as what we want. So the information we get from this documentation is that we have a get endpoint. Get means that this is a method that this API is using. We are only getting information, we're not sending it, we're not changing, we're not deleting and so on. We're only getting it. Then usually you get the URL, which you need to call in order to get the data. In order not to repeat the yes, no, dot, VTF, blah, 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 they just write /API or /something, and before the slash comes the domain. Right below you can see what we're going to be receiving once we've made a successful call to the API. So we're going to get an answer, we're going to get forced. They also provide us with an image, which is the GIF. That's a hot discussion there, but we're interested just in the answer. All right, so we know that it's a get and it's a /API. Now let's get back to our code. Okay, so we have steps here which we could follow and make it a little bit more structured. First one, create a fetch answer function and call the API. Let's go simple about that. Const fetch answer. This is an ES6 syntax. If it's not ES6, you would write function fetch answer. Those two things are very alike. They have their differences, but for the moment it doesn't matter. In every challenge we're going to be covering different way of fetching API. This one I have decided to cover the fetch method, which is native to the browser, I think. Let's check that one out. Always can double check everything with Google. There we go. This link you will find in the useful resources on the website, along with some other links that you could read before starting this challenge or during if you have curiosity about some other stuff. So, Fetch API provides a JavaScript interface for accessing and manipulating parts of the HTTP pipeline. A basic fetch request is really simple to set up. Have a look at the following code. Okay, let's copy that one. So we're gonna have a reference here. I have already prepared the endpoint here. I took the base domain, yes, no, WTF /API. So that's the endpoint that they have mentioned in the documentation that we need to fetch the data from. So we can do fetch. We're writing exactly the same as we see below. And since we have stored that in a variable, we can use that like this. Or if you don't want to use the variable, you can do it this way as well. So fetch by itself, it's gonna make the API call, but we're not gonna see anything. So we need to tell fetch that as soon as we get something back from the API, we want to do something with it. And that's why we have the .then. So let's write .then response, a common name for whatever we're receiving back from the API. And the syntax that you see here, This is just implicit return. The same as this syntax. If you want, we can do it this way. We can wrap it. That's the argument. Here we can write response.json. You save it, you see this is what Prettier did. It added some semicolons and everything. I always forget them. Let's console.log what response is. Save it. Let's comment this part. We want to see how this thing works and what we're getting from the API. We also need to call our function because otherwise it's not gonna fire fetch answer. All right. Let me open the console. Here we have response and we have a body. Readable string, blah, 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 blah. So why do we get this? Let's get back to the fetch documentation. So it's mentioned here we are fetching a JSON file across the network, da, 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 da. So this is just an HTTP response, not an actual JSON. To extract the JSON body content from the response, we use the JSON method. Basically, if you want the response to be readable in the format that the API sends it, you need to do response.json. Let's do, can I do it right here? Response.json. And we need to refresh the page. Well, now it's a promise. We need to do another then. You see how they had it here? First, you fetched the response, you waited for the response, made a JSON out of it. Because it's also a promise, you need to use another .then. And because of that, it's much more simple to write response.json like this with an implicit return. Just chain another .then data and we can console log data. Let me put this ones side by side. Let's refresh and we get an answer, we get a force, we have an image. Cool, so we got the fetch answer to work. We got our data. Another thing, I prefer to name the things the same way, so I'm gonna name them data this one and data this. We can remove this one as we have successfully did that. Step one was create a fetch answer function and call the API. Done. Second, output the API's response. The finished one looks like this. Will I pass the exam? No. That's the answer that we're getting from the API. Let's get back to our version. We have the answer. Let's get the data.answer only because that's essentially what we're interested in. If we refresh, we're gonna have a yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. If I refresh many times, I get different answers. Let's do the output the API's response into this little triangle. Let's create a function, const show answer. And here we need to find this triangle and put the text inside of it. We can go to our index.html file or we can inspect it. How to open an inspector? Click inspect and you have the inspector. The inspector has several things. It has elements, console, and many other ones. Elements is kind of like the HTML part and the CSS part, and the JavaScript is the console. You can also get the JavaScript part in the elements part by clicking in here and clicking the escape key on your keyboard. This way you have HTML, CSS, and console. All right, this selects an element on the page and allows us to inspect it. So we can go in here. It highlights the element right here. So we know that it has a class of ball triangle. And inside of it, you see that we have div element with an ID of an answer, and that's what we're gonna take. So since this is vanilla JavaScript, we don't use jQuery or anything of that kind. We need to get the element with some native magic. You know, it's an ID document dot query selector in a string hashtag or hash. I think it has another name. I'm not sure. Ball, and then we do dot inner HTML equals to no. Save it and see if that one works. We also need to call it again. And now if we refresh the page, oh no, we broke something. What happened? Okay, the problem was that I was selecting the ball, even though I have already mentioned that we need to select the answer. Now we have the answer. Yes, we have it. It's a no. Since I have developed it, I know that this should be in a paragraph tag to make it nicer. Let's see. Yeah, cool. But why are we fetching the data, but then we're hard coding the response? Let's connect those two functions together. In the fetch answer, we know that we want to use the data.answer. We want to replace this text. So how are we going to go about it? We are going to replace the console log, not really replace the console log, just be lazy typing, show answer, pass the data.answer to it. And in here, we're going to receive a parameter answer, and we're going to use it here. Now it's hard-coded answer. How can we tell JavaScript that we want a variable to be inside of here instead of hard-coded string? Well, I'll tell you. You can just replace the single quotes with template literals, you need to also add a $sign and then curly bracket, the name of your variable, and then another curly bracket. Now that we have created this chain of first we're fetching the answer, then we are transforming it to JSON, and then we're sending it to show answer, so we don't need to call the show answer on loading. It's a yes and it's a no. If you refresh it many times, it's gonna give you different answers. Cool, we got that one to work. Output the API's response is working. Now attach fetch answer to an event listener. So what's an event listener? An event listener is something that you attach to an element of the DOM, be it the window, a specific div, a form, an input field, a button. You can probably attach it to almost everything. You should not attach it to almost everything though. You need to be careful about that. Right now, we need to attach one event listener to the button and another one to the input field that we have. We want to attach the event on load, so once our page is loaded, our browser knows that it needs to listen to a click on the button and fire the chain of events after that. Document.query selector button.add event listener. My coding editor is giving me the options that I need. So as you can see, first the type of it, our type is going to be click, and then we can actually write a function right here, or we can name another function and call it. Let's just create here a function. Okay, let's console log. Clicked, save that, and let's refresh. If I'm gonna click on this button, it should console log. Yeah, we got that. All right, so now when we click on the button, we want to fire our chain of events. We want to get the fetch of the answer going and then showing the answer straight away. Instead of having the fetch answer and load, we can just move it down here, and we're gonna trigger that only on the click. Get answer? No. Yes. Okay, cool. So we got it working. But that's not the only event listener we have. We have as well our input field, this one. And on the input field, there is such a thing called on key press, kind of like already an attached event listener that we can use. We can pass here the JavaScript function we want to call in our JavaScript file, which is going to be called exactly the same way. We will define here const handle key enter, and we passed here an event. So let's catch it here. And let's again console log what we're getting. I put it in curly brackets because I just like to get it like this. If I click here, I'm gonna press down on the A key on my keyboard. So let's see what we're getting here. E, see the key is A and it has a key code. Actually, when you use an input field, you're pressing the enter and want to submit your request. So this is what we're gonna be going for. We want to listen only for an enter, because if the user is just writing like, hey, am I gonna fail my exam? You don't wanna submit the form yet, right? You wanna wait until the user is finished. So in order to find the enter key, I know WestBoss has something. You can go to this website, hit enter, and it's going to give you event.code, event which, location, key, enter. And in our case, look, if we're going to go to our thing, let me bring this up a little bit. If I'm going to hit enter, we're going to get key code 13. So we know that it's 13. We have verified that it's 13. And on enter, we want to submit our request. I keep on saying form, but we want to fetch the answer. So e.keycode, and what do we want to do with that? We want to check if it's equals 13, then we want to call the fetch answer. If e.keycode equals 13, fetch answer. Let's write something, hello, and I'm going to click enter. Cool. Let's see now if it's also working with our click event listener. Will I pass the exam? Get answer. Yeah, we didn't see the first change in the yes or no because we don't have any feedback that we got a new answer. How about we're gonna fix that first? If we check the finished one, if we say hello, you see it's shaking. So if we go to the CSS file, we're gonna find shake ball. This class is shaking the ball. And the way we can verify if that's the class that we need, instead of actually changing it in your HTML or JavaScript first, we can go here. Let me show you how we can attach classes. So on the, not on the button, on the ball, we would want to add a class, and you click on element classes, add the class that copied. If you add it, it's there. You remove it and then you can add it. It's amazing, this tool. Okay, we verified that's actually the class that we need. We want to give like the user a feedback that, hey, we received your request and we are processing it. We want to have that on click, on input submit. Probably the most appropriate place to do that would be before the fetch answer happens. Document.query selector ball, class list dot add in parentheses as a string, we're writing shake ball. Let's see, is it going to rain tomorrow? Get answer. Yeah, it's shaking. Get answer again. It didn't shake again. And you know why? Because if we already have the class, it's not gonna shake it again. So after we show the answer, we need to remove this class. Fairly simple, we just copy it, paste it here, and instead of add, we write remove. All right, did we save this one? Yes, we did. Failing exam, get answer. Yes, get answer again. Well, there is a small shake. You know why it's a small shake? We are adding the class, fetching the data, and once we're showing the answer, we're removing the class. That can happen sometimes very slow or can happen very fast. So in this case, it happens very fast, and this is what we're seeing. In order to kind of mimic a slower API, or just if you want a fixed amount of shakiness, we can wrap this code in a set timeout. I'm gonna do 1000. So 1 second. See, failing exam. Let's try again. No. Yes. Cool. So now every time you're submitting a request, we're gonna see a visual feedback that it's been submitted and being processed. Awesome. You see that our document or query selector for the ball is being repetitive. This is how you know that it's the time to extract it to its own variable. Copy this. We're gonna write here selectors const ball selector equals that one. And now we can replace it. And let's see if that one still works. Works. All right, so you see that now every time we are asking our magic ball for an answer, the input field is not being cleared, which is not a very nice user experience. So let's change that. Let's say that after we showed our answer, we want to clean the response of it. Put it on top, const cleanup response. And what it's gonna do is it's gonna clear out the input field as well as the answer that we have on the screen. Because if you don't have the question anymore, then the answer is also kind of irrelevant. Okay, so what do? We are taking it from here, from our show answer we already have. Let me close this sidebar. We're pasting it up here, but instead of this, we're just gonna have an empty string. For the input field, we will need to inspect ID input. How sophisticated was that? Document.query selector, single quotes, hashtag. For the input, you need to access the dot value and make it equal to an empty string. Let's call this function somewhere. Let's maybe say, after we shake the ball, let's clean it up. You see, if we do something like this, shakes the ball and removes it. So since it's all in the same order, it shows the answer, it shakes the ball, and then it clears the answer. We don't get to actually see the answer. Another solution for that would be actually in cleanup response, where we create a set timeout. Hint, hint, clear output after 3 seconds. And we're gonna add then 3000 milliseconds, and let's see how that one works. Refreshing it. Will it snow tomorrow? And get the answer. No. Yeah, it disappeared. Cool. Mostly the app is working. It's doing what it needs to do. However, if you wish to cover some more user experience things, then let's do it. One of them, for example, would be, what if I write something and I click 10 times on the button? You saw that? It did a yes and a no and a blah, 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 blah. Every time on a click, it's gonna trigger the fetch answer. And if I'm gonna write something and I'm gonna click and then I'm gonna enter, it's gonna go crazy. It's gonna create tons of API requests. Usually you don't want somebody to trigger thousands of API requests. That can be very expensive, unnecessary, and very confusing. In order to prevent that from happening, let's create a function that is going to disable the button. Let's call it disable button. We're gonna use very straightforward naming. So how does disabling a button works exactly? First of all, we're gonna work on the button again, which is gonna be repetitive. So what are we gonna do? We're gonna stick it up here. I'm going to do const button selector equals to this, and here we're going to replace that. All right, Perfect. So the way we usually disable buttons is by setting an attribute called disabled to be equal to disabled in a string. For example, if we go to this button and in here we say edit as HTML and we write disabled equals disabled and we click out, then you see the button is disabled. We need to achieve having this through JavaScript. How do we do it? We do .set attribute and we define first which attribute, so it's the disabled attribute, and the value of the disabled attribute is also disabled. And we want to disable the button once we have a request. Call here disable button. I'm gonna rain and the button is disabled, hooray! But we can still submit. Okay, we see two problems right now. First, it submits many times, even though the button is disabled. Second one, our input field still keeps on submitted. First of all, we're not checking if the field is empty, so let's do that. If we're gonna be using the input selector, which we again have here, const input selector equals this. Now we're gonna use that here. Back to our if input selector dot value, right? Because that's how we work with inputs. And the way that this if works is that if you negated it right here, if we don't have a value in our input selector, then we want to return a function. We want to get out of here. We don't want to continue forward. We don't want to fetch the answer. We don't want to do anything. Let's see if it works. We refresh and with an empty field, nothing happens. I'm clicking on the enter, nothing submits. All right, we got it working. The next problem we had is that when we write something and we click on it, then it continues being submitted. We need to prevent the submission of the form. But how do we know if the button was clicked that the input needs to also kind of be disabled? There are two separate elements and they don't communicate with each other. So we need to create some sort of flag that the functions that are being triggered from those two elements are going to check for this flag and see like, hey, has button submitted something? Then I'm not gonna do anything and I'm gonna return out from my function and vice versa. Let's create a flag. Flags are a very common thing in development overall, and I actually really like using them. You're probably gonna see a lot of them. So let's call this flag is request in progress. And it's going to initially be false. The naming starts with is in order to indicate that it's a Boolean because that's what we're going to be storing. We're going to be storing or true or false. First, we need to know if we're even going to go through with the request because we don't really care if the user has written something or not. If there is a request going on, then we don't really care. If is request in progress, then we're going to return. That happens in the input field as well as in our button. If is request in progress, then return. Now, where are we going to change this is request in progress variable? And also, can we? No, I set it to const. It needs to be a let. A const is a constant variable that cannot be changed. And a let can be. We're going to change that in the fetch answer because as soon as we start fetching something, we need to say, okay, our request is in progress, like stop any other request. Is request in progress, we're gonna equal it to true. However, as we already know, we also need to set it to false somewhere. The most appropriate place would be after the cleanup. Raining. Yeah, cool. So this way, if we're putting it after the cleanup, you cannot resubmit it with the same question, which is more of a philosophical question. Should you ask the magic ball the same question again and again until you get the answer that you want to hear? That's up to you. How about we extract it to its own function? Const set is request in progress. I know the naming is kind of long, but to be honest, it's better for the naming to be longer than meaningless. So we're going to take an example that we set the is request to something, and this something can be true or false. So we're going to make it flexible. It's going to be value, and here it's going to be value. And when we're calling it, we're going to pass. So here we had a false. So we're going to call this function and be false. Where else are we using it? Here, set is request in progress. Let's check. Here we're going to have it as true. Now, another thing that I see here is that we have this line repetitive, and essentially those two things are kind of doing the same. So how about we refactor it a little bit? Const get answer. That might not be the best name, but we're gonna roll with it. We know that the repetitiveness comes from this one And we also know that we want to fetch the answer. The button and the input field, both of them, they don't want to submit a request if there is already a request going on, as well as they both want to submit a request. We can remove those things from them right now. And in case of the button, we're going to remove everything actually. Now we can just define which function it should call once the event listener is being triggered. In the handle, we're going to call the get answer instead. All the other functionality, we move to the get answer function. All right, so we're sorted. Let's double check that everything works. Yes, perfect. Oh no, you know what now? The button is still disabled because we didn't undisable the button, did we? Where do we disable the button? In here in the fetch answer, right. How about we do it the same as setting the flag? We're also going to set disable button state. And we're going to pass a flag if it's true or false, because we need true and false options. So it's going, the first one in here, the first use case is going to be a value. And we're going to say if value, then we want this to happen. Else, if we want to enable our button, that's the word, we're going to remove the disabled attribute. And in this case, you don't need to define the value of it because you're just going to be removing it. Okay, this line doesn't really tell me much. So I would like to call this value is disabled or is disabling. Yeah, it's going to tell us, okay, are we going to disable the button? Because if yes, then okay, disable it, else enable it. Now, where would we enable the button? Would that be after the request is false? Yeah, I would say so. False. Yeah, cool. Now it works. Oh no, but now it works as well if it's empty. Where did we miss? On get answer, we need to check if the input field is empty. Didn't we check that? Did I remove it? Probably removed because I'm pretty sure we were talking about that. Okay, so where are we going to do that? We're going to do that in get answer, right? Because it's not only concerning our input field submission, but it's also concerning our button submission. We're going to check if there is a request in progress. Oh, I remember now, I removed it. If, and I even extracted it, if input selector dot value, if it's not there, then return. If not those things, then we want to proceed and fetch the answer. Okay, cool. So now we don't have this kind of stuff. Hello. Cool. Yeah, awesome. So what do we have here? Clear output after 3 seconds, which we did. We forgot to follow our little plan. Attach fetch answer to an event listener, clear output, and now optional add loading or error states. One thing I see is that we have this answer thing, which is being repeated. Answer selector equals answer select. You don't have to call it selector, but you know, when you have many variables, I guess it helps when you describe what's happening inside of that variable. All right, looking at the code, there are some things that you can do to improve it, or you could just leave it like that, because really you can refactor endlessly and there's always going to be tons of opinions. At the end of the day, you should get to know best practices and find your coding style within them. All right, so what do we have left? We have an error that we are showing to the user. Let's do that one. So when do we want to show an error? We want to show an error when the user is trying to submit a request without asking us a question. That happens in here. If there's no value in the input selector, then we can show the error. Const show error. We know as well that we have the paragraph with an error. You know what? Let's start from here. Let's copy that. Error. This is how I usually code. I just copy down things so many times. Now we can use it in the show error. Error selector dot inner HTML. What's the error? You need to type your question. Okay. And we're gonna show it in here. It's important to still keep the return because we don't want to continue. If we would remove the return and we just say, hey, show an error, but we don't tell JavaScript to get out of that function and to stop it, then it's gonna still fetch the answer, which is not what we want. So we need to return, submit, hey, you need to type your question. Cool. Now it should disappear. Set timeout, again, error selector, and we're gonna equal it to an empty string. We're gonna remove it after 3 seconds, just like the input. So let's see. get answer, you need to type your question, and it disappeared. Well done. This is it. This is our working app. So this was all for now, and see you next time. Bye.